public hearing of the Legal and Constitutional Affairs References Committee inquiry into Australia's youth justice and incarceration system. The committee's proceedings today will follow the program as circulated. These are public proceedings being broadcast live via audio. Before we begin, I remind senators of their obligations under the Behaviour Code for Australian parliamentarians to treat witnesses with dignity, courtesy, fairness and respect. I remind witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence to the committee. The committee prefers evidence to be given in public, but under the Senate's resolutions, witnesses have the right to request to be heard in confidence, described as being in camera. If you are a witness today and intend to request to give evidence in camera, please bring this to the attention of the Secretariat as soon as possible. If a witness objects to answering a question, the witness should state the ground upon which the objection is taken, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that answer be given in camera. Such a request may, of course, be made at any other time. A witness speaking for the first time should state their full name and the capacity in which they appear, and witnesses should speak clearly and into the microphones to assist Hansard to record proceedings. Mobile phones and other electronic devices should be switched off or turned to silent mode. It is now my pleasure to warmly welcome our international panel. And what I will do is ask you all to state your full name and the capacity in which you appear for the committee today, and then we can kick things off. So we might start at this end and we'll work our way along. Lucky you.
My name is Marcelina Olava. I am the administrator for the Kawaii Youth and Family Wellness Center, which also is inside of the youth facility, Hawaii Correctional Facility. And I'm here in support of the Justice Reinvestment Movement.
Hello, I'm David Maguire, and I'm Chief Executive of the Grandma Foundation, a non-for-profit who look after kids in custody and outside of custody also.
My name is Karen McCluskey. I'm the Chief Executive of Community Justice Scotland. I am a public servant and here also in support of the Justice Reinvestment.
My name is Vincent Schiraldi, and I am a visiting fellow at the Pinkerton Foundation, which focuses on youth issues in New York City, and also founder of Youth Correctional Leaders for Justice, which is an association of 75 juvenile justice administrators from the United States seeking to reform youth justice.
My name is Anne Hollins, and I'm here as a private individual. I'm the former National Children's Commissioner, and I'm also a patron of Justice Reform Initiative.
Hi, thanks so much for having us. I'm Mindy Sotiri. I'm the Executive Director of the Justice Reform Initiative.
Thank you again too for having us. My name is Robert Tickner. I'm the Chair of the Justice Reform Initiative, which invited the international speakers to be with us, and we're very pleased to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I will say we are so delighted and so excited that we could make this work in person. It's not every day that we can have a panel of international experts available to give evidence in a Senate inquiry, and we're very, very grateful to the work of people like Ms Hollins, Dr Satori and Mr Tickner for facilitating this and allowing this to be able to happen. Now, I understand for all of the witnesses, and I will note for the Hansard record that we have added the last 3 witnesses onto the program at the last minute. But I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses has been provided to you and is available from the Secretariat. So what we will do now is we may not so much turn to questions, but did you have opening statements or anything that you would like to get onto the record first, and then we might move into a discussion? I'm getting some shaking of head. Fantastic. Who wants to start?
I'll start.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So my name is Vincent Schiraldi. I introduced myself before, but I've been the secretary or commissioner or director of youth and adult justice systems in Maryland, Washington, D.C., and New York City, and also was a lecturer and researcher at Harvard and Columbia. And I guess my main thought, given the time we have, and I don't want to talk for long, I did submit written testimony to the Secretariat, is really sort of looking at the history of what's gone on in the United States, where we went through some very terrible periods with juvenile justice. We were calling our children super predators. State after state was passing legislation to lock more of them up, either in juvenile facilities or in adult facilities. We got up to about 109,000 young people in custody of the various systems throughout the country, and 14,500 in adult prisons and jails. And this all was happening in the 80s and 90s, and it was a real sort of feeding frenzy in many respects on juveniles. And then since the year 2000, it's very dramatically turned around. The number of kids in juvenile facilities has dropped by 75%. We've closed over 80% of the large juvenile facilities in the country, facilities of 100 or larger. There's been an 84% decline in the number of kids in in an adult prisons and jails. So it was 14,500. It's 2,000 now, which is still way too high, but a lot better than 14,500. And you know, for people who believe that the only way to have public safety is to lock more kids up, this should be a disaster, right? It should be a jailbreak. Exactly the opposite. There's been a 78% decline in juvenile crime during this time period. That's 4 times the decline in adult crime as a percentage. So adult crime went down during this time, but nowhere near as much as juvenile crime went down. I worked for part of this time in New York City. I would like to give that as one example. We had some terrible things happen in our system in the 2000s, early 2000s. A young man, a 15-year-old boy from the Bronx, was killed in state custody, and that launched several investigations. The state, the governor impaneled a inquiry like this, although not with senators, with academics and researchers, and the Justice Department investigated, which in the U.S. the Justice Department's able to investigate and sue states over conditions in their juvenile facilities, and they did sue, and the state settled. It entered a consent decree promising to live up to certain conditions, but during that time the findings, they published the findings, and they were just awful. State staff were beating the kids up. They were body slamming them to the ground. What killed this young man was a typical takedown at a facility where they would land on the kid's chest. So it was really terrible. And the way the system in New York State worked was every time a county or city sent a young person to the state juvenile system, we would pay for half the cost. So it was about $260,000 per kid per year, which meant every time we sent a kid, we'd pay $120,000. And we had 500 kids in state custody from New York City. So millions of dollars were being spent. My boss, Mayor Bloomberg, is a sort of famous billionaire businessman, and he just thought it was a bad deal. He wasn't a liberal. He wasn't sort of moved by sort of theoretical arguments. He was like, we're sending kids there. They're getting abused. Their recidivism rates are over 70%. I don't want to send any more children there. I want to take all of our young people back from state custody, which is what he did. We got legislation passed. Once he proposed this legislation, he tasked me as probation commissioner and commissioner of Child Protective Services to convene a group of leaders from the city, judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, police, to plan out what a system would look like if we never sent a kid to the state. And so we developed a whole network of community programs. We adopted a risk assessment instrument, created a grid that would guide recommendations by my department to the courts. The courts and the prosecutors and defense attorneys blessed that, they bought into it. Didn't mean they were guaranteeing to do what we recommended, but at least they understood how we were going to make the recommendations. And then for the few remaining kids, it was going to be facilities in New York City run by nonprofit organizations. The largest would be 20 beds. Most would be between 6 and 8 and 10 beds each, scattered throughout the city. And we set up 2 special schools for them so that every day they would get up and go to school. Outrageously good outcomes. So I'll get to the end and then my colleagues can go. In the 3 years prior to the passage of Close to Home, there was a 24% decline in juvenile crime in New York City. In the 3 years after it, there was a 53% decline in juvenile crime in New York City. 91% of the kids passed all their grades. The vast majority of them went back home with wraparound support services. So even the ones that did go to these small facilities, which were much more rehabilitative than what they had been receiving, they were still getting wraparound services post-release. The rest of the state did not adopt this, and the rest of the state had a 20% decline in juvenile crime during that time compared to New York's 53% decline. So I think by keeping kids out of those sort of destructive environments and providing them with the kind of help they need to turn their lives around, New York City was one example, but this was happening all over the country. Texas was closing juvenile facilities. Governor of New Jersey, Republican, closed 3 facilities. The governor of Maryland, the state I live in now, Governor Hogan, Republican, closed 5 facilities. All over the country, there were double-digit declines, and everybody was doing it their own way. I just described New York's, but this was happening, this innovation was happening all over the country. The federal system, they, like you, don't have a big footprint on juvenile justice, but they did provide funding to the states, and they withheld that funding if the states were putting kids in adult facilities or locking up kids for what we call status offenses, offenses that wouldn't be a crime if you were an adult, running away from home, staying out late, skipping school. So the feds did have a role. The biggest role, I thought, was they occupied a sort of bully pulpit. They brought us together. They were, in some respects, like what you did, but imagine if it was the federal government bringing together people from the whole country to talk about best practices so we could learn what they were doing in California and Missouri, and they could learn what we were doing in New York City. It was a great role. So it was sort of a bit of a carrot and a stick. They did put out funding, but they also were able to withhold it under certain circumstances through the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act. That act was signed originally by President Gerald Ford, a Republican, and it was recently bolstered in 2018 and signed again by President Trump. So it had become, it was in the 90s, a bipartisan vilification of kids, and it's evolved now to a somewhat bipartisan retrenchment of that original approach and much less reliance on incarceration. So I'll stop there and turn it over to my colleagues.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So thank you very much indeed for inviting me here today. I feel slightly embarrassed, having just spent 2 days with people from all around Australia who were hugely impressive and an embarrassment of riches in terms of the third sector and some of your experts that you have out there. So in many ways, the evidence is out there, but I just wanted to touch on Scotland. So Scotland's achievement in removing all under-18s from prison is a product of decades of layered, interconnected policy, built on a conviction that how a society treats its most vulnerable children is a measure of its character, not merely its justice system. We've got a number of pillars that's allowed us to get there. So first, early intervention and a wholesale preventative approach. We've invested deliberately in the earliest years of life, as I know Australia has, in universal health visiting, early learning and targeted family support. And we've orientated our entire public services architecture away from reaction and towards prevention. And the effect on the justice system are the consequences of that wholesale movement into a public health model of prevention. Secondly, we put a policy in which is getting it right for every child, or GIRFEC, as we call it. It's a national framework which requires every professional in health, education, housing or justice to assess a child's well-being throughout its life and act in a coordinated way. One of those strands has been keeping children in school. We have had a zero exclusion policy. It has been probably incredibly challenging for our teachers, but they have been phenomenal in driving it. Last year, and it was 2024, was the first year we had zero permanent exclusions from school in Scotland. Third, we've had the promise, which is around children in care. Children in care are disproportionately represented within our juvenile justice system and indeed our adult justice system. We had an independent care review produced not only recommendations but a commitment that Scotland had failed our care experienced young people and that we would change, and now drives policy in keeping children, families and supporting communities and ensuring that care experience is never a pathway to criminalisation. And fourth, we have a welfare-based justice system. The children's hearing system in Scotland is based on need and not deed. It has been around for 50 years. We put children at the heart of our decision-making. We focus on their need, and have now embedded the UNCRC into our Scottish law, which means that no child will go to prison under 18 ad infinitum. So it's been a significant journey, but we've gone further, that we now have sentencing guidelines that now mean that we sentence children, young people under the age of 25 differently, recognising all the neuropsychology and the brain development that means that young people sometimes make decisions based on risk because that risk-taking part of their brain is overdeveloped, and the other parts that prevent that and embed good decision-making aren't there. Thank you. I shall stop because I know it's quite long.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to explain a bit of history of where we were and where we are now. I don't want to start where we are now because you are going to see quite a totally different type of system. But if you think about the worst children's human rights of any country, is a dictatorship. That is where we were not a long time ago in Spain. And from there, we came across to do all those changes. In 1991, we were the first non-for-profit organization to be running detention. We provide liberty to kids who committed an offence, and we've been the first one, and we've grown to that. Now we have 70% of the youth justice in the whole of Spain. Not just custody, we do probation, we do early intervention, and we do all the programs both in the community and also inside. It was quite difficult. The first thing, it was politicians, everybody agreed in one thing, which it wasn't working at all. I mean, imagine criminal age was between 12 and 16. That meant that kids 16, they were in adult prison until 1991. And from there, we came across a long journey. They didn't have evidence, and they put us, because we were pretty much the only one saying, yeah, we can do it. We didn't have a clue about how to do things at the beginning. We did have a lot of experience. I mean, to give you an example, it's very similar to being father the first time. You don't know how to be a father until you don't have more than one, and you learn through the process. That is how we started, with a lot of professionals from academia, from psychology, social worker, teachers, and all around the kid. The first thing that changed dramatically was how the kid was viewed by the system. Before, you can maybe recognize some, the kids were seen as a risk for society. And we see when a kid commits a crime, we ask why, what they are their needs, what we do to fulfill all those needs and to minimize the risk of reoffending when they go back to the community. The base, I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody will agree, the base of, or the first principle for us is dignity and respect, and that is children's rights, human rights all across. From there, we work very with relationship. I mean, if you come to any of our center, you won't think that you are in detention. Kids are having a good time, but focusing in being rehabilitated. We don't punish kids twice. The punishment is the not having freedom. After that, what happened in the center is we look for their needs and we fulfill their needs. I can give you what was before we started. 85%, when I started to work in custodial settings, 85% of the kids were from the Gypsy community, and now is between 2 and 5%. Other achievement is 90% of the kids were on remand when we started. Now it's 10%. We flip everything. Integration rate is 85%. Sorry, integration rate, 50% reoffend, and that is not just because we do everything amazingly well. It's because the whole system is working as one team. Things changed that happens in that time in 2000 was all this revolution in terms of all these changes where every single party in government, they agreed to do this because everything was working badly. We have the judge coming to our center on a monthly basis and visiting the kids and making sure that the sentencing that he put is working properly. The prosecutor is coming with the perspective of making sure that the kid is safe for the community. And 85% of our kids, while they are in our care, they go to the community. We test them before going on release. That is what we do. They get jobs. They have most of them go to their families, to the communities. I mean, those things about putting kids far away from the family doesn't work. We work very closely with the family and community. That is essential. And that has been a long journey with a lot of up and downs until now it's 35 years doing this. We have now the evidence we didn't have at the beginning. Replicating imprisonment, adult imprisonment for kids doesn't work. There is an evidence of that. And that is the reason what we do is to treat kids as kids. Teenagers are difficult. We all have been difficult and teenagers, and we have had teenagers ourselves. And more when they come with the trauma, with the mental health, with the problem in the family, with the drug use, with the, you name it, or all together. And we need to have professionals doing that. And I cannot forget about saying this. The change of culture of not just looking at the kids, but who were the professionals looking after them. We don't have security guards telling them what to do, what they cannot do. What we have is educators. Forget about teachers. Educator is more a modeling fair person who are there putting boundaries, and through relationship we achieve things. I always like to speak about parenting model. I was 21 and when I started to work in this field, and I didn't have a clue again what it was the parenting model, but that is the relationship. Whatever our parent did with us is what we do with our kids. And this is all our achievement, but believe me, we were in a very bad situation and we came forward. That's me.
Thank you. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having us today. Hawaii was at a place where a lot of our kids are Native Hawaiian kids, the indigenous population, were in the correctional facility. So imagine 10% of Hawaiian and Polynesians, and they are making up 70% of the juvenile justice system.
We can imagine that all too well, Madeleine.
Okay. Well, for Hawaii, that was, the judges were part of the looking at it. They were seeing kids coming in, going out, coming in, going out, and that had an impact a lot for them. Now it's what is going on with kids, evaluating what is happening. Why is there so much of the indigenous population inside the four walls of the prisons? And with that, they came down and look at how can we strategize and get this going. And this is where pretty much everybody came together, where the judges were, of course, the lead in all of these entire processes, but inviting the different agencies to the table, and especially the community members. And the agencies were the Department of Education, Department of Health, which is the CAMHD, Child and Adolescent team. We also had the police department. We also had the Attorney General, because they represent all the state agencies, prosecutors, public defenders, and most importantly, the young people. It was the voice of the young people being able to share their stories and the families that were impacted that brought that to the reality of us. Once the kids are locked up, they don't get to see that. But being able to have their voices and being able to get the feedback made us realize that we're absolutely doing something wrong. And because we're doing something wrong, what is it that we're going to do about? We need to start looking at a kid as being, the child as being the child, so that we can care, love, and provide for them. Being able to look at that, we look at the data, we look at the evidence, what is it that we need to do? And this is where we came down to let's look at an indigenous model, how we can make sure that we bring the community together, bring the youth together, to ensure that, that we are honoring the voices of the young people that are impacted, honoring the families that are impacted, the safety of the community, because there's always their concern, and how do we bring this and make it work. The model started with looking at indigenous values of Ho'oponopono and a lot more that is there. Ho'oponopono is the Western way of looking at conflict resolution, but this is dealing with healing with the youth, with the family, and with the community. How do you bring that back all together? With those indigenous values, we reach out to the community who service the youth, and they were able to bring a lot more voices and a lot more support. With that, we created that model where we look at what it is now. We used to have the change now is that we had 80% of the youth reduced. We used to have hundreds in the correctional setting, but now, before I left, it was 30 kids in the facility in secure setting. But we were on the campus of 437. We look at our legislators, who were the policymakers, to see how we can change this. And they came together because we engaged them early on how to change this, and they made policies and they made laws to make sure that we are servicing our youth. Assessments are done, money are put in programming for our youths. The entire campus of 437 acre, there's only one secured facility, but all of the different programs that are on there, we have the programs for houseless youth, we have programs for sex trafficking youth, we have programs for vocational youth, we have transitional homes, we have step down for mental health. So it's so critical in making sure that wraparound services are around this youth. With those numbers being reduced, we are looking at how do we work with you. So we look at it as diversion, the prevention that it needs to happen. With all the savings that we got from not, we were almost at the same thing where it's almost $1 million to house a youth. But now the number has gone down so much. So all of that money has been reinvested back into wraparound services and diversion programs. So in the beginning, that the youth are being diverted to get services rather than locking them up for not going to school, for fines, for missing their court hearings. You know, even I mean, as an adult, I would forget sometimes that I have to do certain things. But imagine a youth who has to go to court every single time. You know, it's looking at what those crimes are and then making sure that the consequence well, not the consequence first, identify what the needs are first so that we can support them. And we don't just look at the youth, we also look at the family. What is it that is impacting the family? When we started looking at that model, we were realizing that a lot of our girls were traumatized. There's so much different issues that comes up with them. In 2022, Hawaii, for the first time, had 0 girls incarcerated. It's because we were looking at counseling different programs. We were looking for how do we support therapeutic healing for the youth, both culturally and also with the Western way of looking at things for our sex trafficking youth. And a lot of it was community and building that rapport for that transition so that it's successful. So those were some of the highlights for us. The big numbers has gone down, continue to go down. There are upticks on certain things, but this is where we, instead of running scared about it, we sit down and evaluate because it changes over time. And then we look at what is it that we're missing this time, right? Always being able to assess ourselves would be able to ensure that we are meeting a need for that youth, for that family, so that our community are flourishing. Some of our youth now are leaders, leading a lot of different changes. We have a youth commission team, which is all led by system-involved youth, not just justice, but CWS, CAMHD, kids that were in detentions when they were in school. All of them are running these organizations now, and they're taking bills to the legislature. You know, there's adults that is guiding, but they're the voice that is going to the legislature, and they legislate some of the things. And you'll be surprised with some of the things that they have come in because the stories they tell is real. And for us to be able to empower the youth, it's going to save us a lot more money later on. But the voices is real, the issues are real, and they're able to respond accordingly when the changes are happening. So I'll leave it to that.
We have, for procedural reasons, and Mindy and Robert, we're just going to limit the evidence to the 4 here, if that's okay. Yep. You're welcome to stay there, but we're just going to limit the evidence to the 4 witnesses here on the schedule. Yeah. I remember being so excited in 2022 when I saw the news from Hawaii that there wasn't a single girl in detention in Hawaii, and I think it sort of sparked a discussion in here. So thank you for that great news that came out of Hawaii. But is in terms of the sustainability of this, have there been efforts? How hard has it been to sustain that?
It has been very hard, but engaging our stakeholders, which is also the judges. So we have a very, very good relationship with judiciary. They know the rules. They know we are not to put the girls back there. But sometimes this is where we say, I mentioned earlier about stepping back and looking at what is missing, right? We were so focused in just the sex trafficking that we were doing such an amazing job at it that we forgot that how about the mental health, the youth that has trauma, that has, because there's so much trauma that comes with it being trafficked and all the sex abuse that they have endured. So it's looking at, let's step back. What is it that we need to do? Now, here's what it is, and here's how we can work with them. It's putting more different programs instead of collectively in one building. This is where we need to engage the CPS because most of the kids that are coming in are cross systems. CPS and say, where can we put these youth in a therapeutic home that would be able to respond to their needs, being in care instead of locking them up. So we currently do have 2 girls, but a lot of it is working with the judges. The judges will call, check in, how's my kid? I say, it's time for you to move your kid out. But both of those girls are also Neighbor Island kids. So When I say neighbor island, there are 7 island chain of the chain. So those are also where the focus of Office of Youth Services is looking at how do we have those programs that is in the main island to the rural communities, so that they are able to stay there, they are able to see their family, and making sure that the support is created for them. So, like I said, we take a step back, we evaluate, and now here's where we need to put our money in.
Gosh, well, do you just want to jump into?
Oh yeah, I mean, I would be interested to know about the sort of neighbourhood homes innovation in New York, and there's kind of in everyone's different way. There is this kind of connectedness, families, neighbourhood, community, culture. That kind of connectedness, and is that what was behind the neighbourhood homes model? Where, knowing your neighbours, knowing your family, that connectedness?
Yeah, so the way the system was before, all of juvenile correctional facilities were far away from home. And in New York City, a lot of people don't own cars because the subway system's so good and it's expensive to own a car. So functionally, that meant that when a kid got sent upstate, they kissed their parents goodbye. They didn't see them for 6, 9, 12 months, however long they were up there. So when we did close to home, the legislation said all the facilities had to be within the city of New York or within 20 miles of the city of New York. And that we did live by that legislation. We issued competitive bids for 300 beds. There had been 500 when we started negotiating the bill. But we thought that with the alternatives to incarceration, we'd get it down. And we had talked to our judges and our prosecutors, so we weren't just out on a limb completely. And then, but we never got more than 120 kids. So today there's only 120 kids. The original contracts were for 37 homes that 10 different nonprofit organizations ran. And the rules were they all had to have a local advisory body. Originally, we wanted the young people as close as possible to their homes. And we still do that, but sometimes kids they're not getting along with the other kids in a home, so it's allowed to transfer them, but you have to go back to the judge for that. Usually the judges are pretty good with it, but they don't want kids being dumped out of the programs. So yeah, a big part of it was to do family therapy. The kids are overwhelmingly going to go back home. They're not old enough to completely live on their own. Some do, but by and large they're going home, so we wanted to start that process while they were in custody. And by the way, of those 120, only 40 are locked. The rest are what we call staff secure, so there's no locks on the building.
And before I hand over the call, could I just ask about Scotland in terms of is there that kind of neighbourhood locality basis? How is the work?
So we have 4 secure care facilities, but these are children who are often really traumatised. They're children who've been victims, who've come to harm through sexual abuse and things that Mata has talked about. So but we also have children who've come into conflict with the law and who've committed some harm. It's a very small number, and it is often the kids who are most at risk to themselves or most at risk to others. But it is around their needs. It is not a punishment. It is supportive. It's some of the things that David has talked about. It's been challenging. I mean, there is little doubt I'd be fibbing if I said that we hadn't had some serious offences where children had committed some really serious offences. However, we've stuck to our guns, and they may have to transition at a later stage for a very small number of them into the adult system. But for that period of time, they stay within the care facilities.
I suppose the bulk of what you're all dealing with is the kids you want to keep out of the criminal justice system, and that's kind of the bulk of your work.
It is.
David, is that the bulk of the work?
Diversion is the first thing. Early intervention is the first thing. However, we recognize that some kids are going to commit crimes. Some of them can be dealt with in community, and some, the serious one, and in Spain is when there is violence, normally they come to custody when there is nothing else. But what we really believe is custody shouldn't be a bad place. I was speaking to Mindy before, is what we have in custody is the best resort you can have, even in the whole community. While here, and it's quite cultural when, for instance, in education, a normal education, you have a teacher, and if it's failing, you put a teacher assistant to help, which is a person who has less qualification. In Spain, if you fail in a school, you are going to put a speech and language therapist. You are going to put more resources when it's needed, because the needs are higher, if that makes sense. If you think about the most vulnerable, the most needed in terms of kids are the kids that are going to custody. Then we have psychologists, social workers, psychiatric, doctor. We have the best of the best. Educators, all of them, all the people who work with kids, they have a university qualification. You put all around and they flourish. Pretty much they flourish. We are the one helping them to flourish. If you put the worst of the worst member of staff who are prison officers, that the less qualified, that is what, I mean, is putting again in a prison. That is the reason in Spain we don't have any kid in prison. We call it re-educational center. Could be a care place, but yes, they cannot go at the beginning. They cannot go to the community because we need to make sure that they are safe and everybody is safe. When we are fulfilling their needs, they are all of them. They go to the community to test it. But the first start is community, early intervention, diversion, all those. When it's not working, because some kids don't send them to a bad place, send to the best place possible. Make sense?
That would be a beautiful reform here. Thanks.
It would be, thank you. And I'm just going to ask a couple of and we've got some senators that are via video conference with us as well, or teleconference with us. In terms of some of the challenges that we have here in Australia is if you don't incarcerate young people, so if you take away any kind of criminal responsibility from young people, they'll be exploited by organised crime and adults to go out and commit crimes that they then can't be held responsible for. How have you combated that? Because obviously it's worked, so you haven't had this sort of huge increase. Was there legislation that you introduced to stop that exploitation of children by gangs and organised crime or by adults in any of your jurisdictions?
I generally think that is wildly overstated. I
Okay.
mean, certainly in the United States it's been.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, yes, it happens. I won't say it doesn't happen.
Yep.
I think by and large that's a sort of shibboleth used by people who don't really like the juvenile justice system and
Okay.
want to see more kids in the adult system.
Yep.
When you focus on the needs of the kids and meet those needs in a sort of responsive way, by and large, kids matriculate away from illegal behavior.
Yep.
That's illegal behavior they generate on their own or illegal behavior that somebody 5 years older recruits them to.
Yep.
It is the way to solve abuses by adults is not to abuse kids. And you know, we've had just really sound success with that. And yes, every once in a while an adult does something terrible to a kid and recruits them. But that's not the reason to throw away a juvenile justice
No,
system.
but I guess you haven't introduced any legislation that comes down harder on the grown-ups in terms of if you're a 25-year-old going out there to exploit a 10-year-old or a...
The United States is wildly harsh on adults.
Okay.
We don't need to make it any harsher.
Okay, so
Harshness
you've already got that disincentive there. Okay.
It's already happened.
Yep.
And I would say in Scotland, I mean, that's child abuse. I mean, if adults are predating on children to commit criminality, that's child abuse. And we also have huge amounts of legislation to be able to deal with that.
Okay.
The wrong thing, of course, is to focus on the child who is being manipulated and groomed and a victim of crime. And I think it's that changing, that cultural change to think of them as victims and not as independent, you know, mini adults with their own agency.
Yeah.
Same thing for Hawaii. when we went through the whole commercially sexually exploited youth, the laws has changed. There was such a massive change in laws and changing it to be a lot more harsh on them, but looking at the youth more so as what are the needs. It's always about that need and care. To how do we make sure that the youth is safe, that they are receiving what they need to respond to the trauma, and make sure that they will survive and thrive out in the community. So,
and I guess just going into, I guess, some of the social license. So we've got, probably not dissimilar to what the US was doing quite a few years ago, our states are going much more heavy-handed into youth crimes. How did you change the narrative? How did you educate? So what was the program that happened across the United States that allowed that shift to happen?
And I will say, we've made all the mistakes for you guys. You don't have to make them all by yourselves.
No, we're here to learn.
So, I mean, it was really a combination of things. There were groups like JRI that, brought together advocates who would, push legislators to move in a certain direction. There was actually a really interesting amount of research done on brain science and adolescent development, because there was, the notion of adult crime for adult time really sort of strikes at the core of the juvenile justice system. It says young people are not different enough from adults to warrant this special treatment. And part of that's a philosophical question, but part of it is a research question. Are young people different enough from adults? And, the research found what most parents know, which is that kids are more prone to peer influence. I won't call it peer pressure, because sometimes peer influence is good. That's why we put our kids on football teams and in debate clubs and in dance, right? So that they get positively influenced, but they also get negatively influenced. They're more volatile in emotionally charged settings, not in not emotionally charged settings. So that's why you can have a perfectly reasonable conversation with your 16-year-old son about the ethics class he's taking at school, and he and his buddies can go out and do something ridiculously stupid 15 minutes later. But they are more volatile in emotionally charged settings, and they're less future-oriented, and therefore less able to put off rewards. Great news, they grow out of all of that. The vast majority of them grow out of all of that, especially if they achieve the kind of milestones that we want for our own children, if they accrue social capital as they're growing older. They get educated, they get jobs, they get experiences with volunteerism. And so the juvenile system sort of does the opposite of that. We pull them away from those experiences, we surround them with other kids who have similar problems, and it magnifies their problems. So we had that research. We had the advocates pushing. We had some model program developers that were experimenting, doing randomized controlled trials with various programs targeted at the exact kinds of kids who were getting locked up. So we could say, look at this program. It achieves significantly better recidivism rates than lockup does, generally at much lower costs. And the philanthropic community funded that, and the federal government funded that. And all of that started to accumulate, and then was brought before elected officials in various different states. And then, some of those elected officials had to put their big boy and big girl pants on and take a risk. And they did. And when that happened, they had good outcomes, like they did with Mayor Bloomberg.
Yeah, excellent. And I guess just curious about Scotland's early intervention. And you spoke a little bit about that universal health. Can you just go into a little bit more detail of exactly what that is?
So we were very lucky. We had a chief medical officer. I was head of violence reduction for Scotland.
Yeah.
And we had a chief medical officer who was very interested in all the adverse childhood experiences, and all the, the information that was mainly coming out of the States. And we formed an early years collaborative supported by government. It was actually quite easy to get cross-parliamentary support because everybody likes babies and young people. And it's not soft. It's the most evidence-based policy and practice that we can do, because good early years support, good parenting support is as close as it gets to being magic without being magic. And we have, we've put that throughout the country. It's still getting better. The government's just put in £500 million for a family wellbeing fund. I think politically it seems to be it's a bit of a no-brainer. I think people are very supportive in terms of that public health approach. But then we've also got that secondary prevention side around how do we then support the children who are at risk? And we still have children who are at risk, who are not hiding. They're not hiding. We know who they are. I mean, everybody who I go and see in adult prison, their story starts with, see when I was 5, see when I was 7, see when I was 11. They tell you a story of early years trauma, and most of the professionals know about it. But it's the intervening, what did you do? And so it's been a bit of a journey. It's taken us many decades to get here. We're not there yet.
Can I ask a little bit about that in terms of that mapping? Because we've heard evidence as this inquiry sort of carried on where you're right, these young people have interactions with various systems along their journey, whether that be in the education system, the health system, through social services, and then finally juvenile justice seems to be the sort of the point at which intervention is attempted, if that makes sense. How difficult was it to, because you're right, you know where they are, to shift that, I guess, that conscience of saying, okay, well, we can intervene and these are the things we can do here that will make a big difference. How long did that take? What were the small steps, I guess?
So for us, the Getting It Right for Every Child legislation and policy, because it empowered everybody and it said to everybody, regardless of where you meet that child, you are mandated to intervene and support. So whether that was a teacher, even like youth workers, you know, if we're looking at a child's well-being, and particularly in schools, where children are there in particularly early years in primary school, and it was kindergarten and primary school here as well, isn't it? You know, that teachers were already identifying challenges. When I was doing some of the homicide work, I lost count of the people that told me, I could have told you he was going to be a newspaper headline when he was 8. You know, so it's that understanding some of the data and research and making it happen. Is there enough money in the system? No, there's not. Is there enough child and adolescent mental health services? No, there isn't. We still have waiting lists. Data is a nightmare. I'd love to tell you that we are technologically advanced and that we have all these fabulous data systems that are joined up, and no, they're not. And perhaps in 10, 15 years' time, AI will have solved all of that for us, but I doubt it. But yeah, it's been a bit of a journey, but it has been empowering everybody wherever you meet a child. Okay. It's your role. It's not waiting for youth justice or waiting for anybody else. Yeah. I mean, prison is an infection. Once you get it once, it becomes lifelong and life-limiting. And keeping kids out of it is all of our roles.
That's very, very powerful and something I think worthy of consideration of what we're doing here. In terms of going into New York City, you talked about special schools for kids. What does that look like? Because I think part of the problem is a lot of the youth that we see that interact with our youth justice system here are really disengaged from school. And I think one of the things is if we could keep them engaged in school, perhaps they're not out, you know, on the streets doing things they shouldn't be doing. What did a special school look like in New York City?
So the 2 special schools that we created were just specifically for the 120 kids in. Okay.
So they were, okay.
So they all got up in the morning, they got on a bus and were driven to that special school. They went to that school all day and then they went back home. It was part of the public school system, which was good because then as, you know, it was only 6-7 months that the young people were in these facilities, so they could go right back into their own home schools when they left, and all the credits would carry forth. When I ran the juvenile system in Washington, D.C., we brought in a private school. It was a competitive bid to run that school. And there we ran the school from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. because the kids were so far behind in credits that they were catching up on credits while they were there. And then we had a post-release school for 90 days so that when they came back out, they didn't go plunging right back into their own public school, because D.C.'s public schools were a mess back then, Washington, D.C.'s. And we didn't want them to flame out. We wanted them to complete. Some of them had gained so many credits that they actually graduated from high school in that 90-day period, so they were able to just get done with it. Because often when they went back to their old school, a bunch of kids were trying to beat them up, the assistant principal hated them, they had really bad experiences with their schools. So I'm not saying they all graduated, but way more graduated than ever thought. And it was really interesting to watch the kids say, oh, I'm like this close, I can actually graduate. You know, I don't even have to get an equivalency diploma, I can actually get a real diploma. It was kind of cool.
That's brilliant. And then sort of final question, in terms of, you've spoken about some kids that are going into programs, and I'm guessing they're more therapeutic, help them, they've done, how long on average are they staying in those programs in each of your jurisdictions?
My centre, for instance, the average will be between 9 and 12 months.
Okay.
I mean, depending what they've done, but the average, we don't have short sentence. We believe short sentences for punishment.
Yep.
I cannot do anything with in a week with any kid.
Yep.
I need just to establish, and we base our working relationship, just to establish a good relationship, we need 6 months. And we are good with relationship. Imagine in a month, we can't. But yes, average 9, 12 months.
Okay.
Serious crime. I mean, that is the reason they are there.
Yeah.
If there is no serious, community.
Yep. Excellent. Senator Cox.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, thank you for joining us this afternoon for this important hearing. Just to give you some context, I'm a senator from Western Australia, and so I'm on the west coast of Australia and one of the largest jurisdictions that has a big geographical spread of both metropolitan, regional, rural and remote communities here in Australia, and I'm a First Nations woman and a member of the Labor government. My question, first I want to start with Ms McCluskey, if I can, from Scotland. In Australia, our governments obviously face a lot of, I think, as the Chair couched conversation, but many jurisdictions in Australia talk about being tough on crime and tough on youth crime in particular. How is Scotland maintaining some of that public confidence in the model that diverts children away from the formal justice processes while sort of taking community safety seriously at the same time?
Yeah. So the tough on crime. So from the very get-go, I've started the smart on crime. I mean, I talk about the evidence as the evidence is the evidence. You might not like it, but it is there. I think it's a really good question right now when we've got such polarised debates and this whole idea about what is tough or soft. I think smart is a good way to try and overcome that. I'm distinctly analogue in a digital society now. I've realised that actually to try and convince the public, I go out and I speak to them face to face. On average, I used to speak to 10 to 15,000 people face to face every year. I still go out to schools constantly, speaking to 15, 16 and 17-year-olds, having a really engaged conversation about, I show them a life story and then I ask them themselves, you know, what would you do? And it's fascinating how you can convince people. And they know themselves about what the evidence, I would have supported them early years, I'd keep them in school. People know what the solutions are. I think the most important thing that I've learned is the ability to disagree well. I meet lots of people who disagree with me, and I think that what I usually say to them when it's talking about violence or whatever else, I say to them, "Do you want to reduce violence?" And most people say yes to me, which is always a good thing. And then I'll say to them, "Like, let's discuss about how we get there." I think it's been long term. I think I did a huge amount with newspaper editors at the very beginning. I brought all the editors in. I constantly went back to them and said, "Look, I'm not looking for a cheerleader. I've not got the terror of error. If I get this wrong, you can hold me to account. But when you're reporting this, I need you to take a reasonable and sober attitude to what I'm talking about." And I think that started to change some of the narrative. And also we talked about stories, we talked about people. We talked about young people who were, who'd come through the system, who'd got into employment, who were looking after their kids, who were paying their taxes, and people like that, They like people to be part of society. But it is continuous. When I ask people now how they get their information, 98% of people tell me TikTok. I'm not on TikTok. But that is how people are getting their information from crime and, what's tough and what's good. And I think that is a real challenge, is how to get out to people. But I don't think I'll ever be on TikTok, alas.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Mr. Maguire. This diagram model speaks or appears to heavily rely on relationships, education, routine, skilled staff and progression back into the community. If there was an Australian jurisdiction that couldn't adopt a whole model immediately, what are some of the non-negotiable elements that they would need to get right first?
I think it's first steps, Dave.
First steps for having the model.
Yeah, for getting there. What are the first steps?
Oh. First step is to convince the government. I mean, we've been about changing how people speak about tackling crime and so on. The first thing is we need to find government who has the courage to do something radically different, to explain and go to the public and say, you know what we are doing now is not working. We try, I've been involved in Australia since 2015 and I haven't seen any change. Let's try something that has a track record of 35 years. Now we have like a version of our model better than when we started, because as I told you, it was, we didn't have a clue, and we improved. But that is the first step. The first step is let's do that, and let's see who needs to be involved, because it's not just you are going to be responsible of these kids. We need to involve the judges, we need to involve the community, we need to involve prosecutors, everybody. But who lead all of this are politicians. I cannot do anything on my own. I mean, we need to be in the same boat, everybody. That is the first step.
Thank you very much. And if there were elements of those that the whole model, that shouldn't be left out, would you like to provide any commentary on that?
Yeah. From the model, things that you cannot forget is, first thing is children rights, human rights. Relationship is another principle, speaking to the involving families. It's impossible to do it with them. More principle, it will be consistency. We have 35 centers, and it doesn't matter in what shift you go. Every single one of my centers are working in the same way. It doesn't matter who are the educator there. That is, and having, I don't know, we have, there are so many principles. We have expectation. We really have very high expectation to our kids, and they have a very good structure and regime. They cannot do. If you go to any of our centers in any time of the day, except night, they won't be in their room. They're all of them engaged in the process. They will be doing, spending leisure with other peers, and also always led by the educator. You will have people doing schooling, people doing vocational training, people in the community. But there is no one who is bored doing nothing, and that is key. Kids, the one thing they don't want to have, they want a purpose, and the purpose about these centers should be rehabilitation. They all want to be in their community, and not punishment. That are my key principles. Everything I've said, I think.
Thank you very much. Can I go to Mr. Ciraldi? Your work argues for reducing of the use of youth prisons and replacing them with small home-like facilities where secure placement is necessary, and reinvesting some of those savings into more community-based supports. For a jurisdiction in Australia starting from an overcrowded, crisis-driven youth detention system, where does that reform begin?
So I think I heard most of what you said. So if I was in an environment where there was an overcrowded situation, my understanding, for example, here in New South Wales is that 75% of the kids in custody, there's about 220 kids, are on remand, and that the average length of stay for those kids is 9 days. I would submit you're probably not getting a lot of public safety for that. 9 days is just long enough to make a kid self-identify as a juvenile delinquent rather than a sort of good citizen. And my understanding is you're spending around $1 million per kid per year. So let's imagine you could do a thorough analysis of the population with all your stakeholders in the room. What offense behaviors are these kids engaged in? What's their risk levels? What are their needs? And that when you did that, you were able to say to yourself, wow, we've got a pretty substantial number of low-risk kids coming in and out of custody, and very often they're coming in and out of custody because of their social needs rather than their risk to public safety. So we think prosecutor, judge, cop, community, that a good portion of these kids could be served in their homes with services. They're low risk enough to be able to go home. Some of them with not a lot, but some of them with substantial help. And that if we did that, we'd have half as many kids locked up. So now you're talking about 6 facilities in New South Wales. Maybe you get to close 3 or 4 of them, each of which houses 20 kids each. If you close 60 beds worth of facilities at $1 million per kid per year, you're freeing up $60 million. I'm betting that continuum of services you want to buy doesn't cost anywhere near $60 million. And then fairly evaluate it, like you said. Beat me up if the outcomes are worse. I don't want worse outcomes. My contention is there's a lot of kids in custody who are low and medium risk, who be served better and have lower rearrest rates than the current system. That's a testable question. That's not something that comes down from a tablet on Mount Sinai. You could actually do that research and decide whether it's true or not, and then evaluate it and expand it if it's true and tweak it if it's not. I think it's true, and that's what our experience has been.
Great, thank you very much. And I'll go to Ms. Aulava. Your model places a strong emphasis on culture, family, land and community. What lessons should Australia take from Hawaii when designing First Nations-led alternatives to youth incarceration?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I didn't catch the last part.
What lessons could Australia learn from Hawaii in relation to designing First Nations-led alternatives to youth incarceration?
Being able to listen to, we're so big on the voice of the youth, voice of the family, and voice of the community, because that is how we build sustainability through different process. And being able to do that is also bringing the community in and having those conversations. The model is empowering the youth to find that to redefine their identity within those cultural values and finding themselves belonging back to the land, which is something that we are so grounded in Hawaii is part of the land and how we use that land to cultivate us and build our resilience so that we can be the best leaders for tomorrow. So the community is what we're able to, and we refer a lot to our elders. They're the one who give us the cultural practice so that we can look at kids from their perspective and from the cultural perspective. take for one example, trauma informed is about, responding to a trigger. But from somebody from a cultural perspective is how do we heal the whole being of the spirit, the mind, and the body, so that they would be able to heal and then continue that healing instead of passing down trauma, like to the family, and then of course it's going to impact the community. Hope that answers your
Thank you very much. Chair, how much time do I have left?
Please keep going as long as you need, Senator Cox.
Okay, thank you. This question is really directed at the whole panel. Across all of your countries, there's a sort of common thread that seems to be that youth justice reform only really works when governments invest in prevention, relationships, community support and reintegration. So what is the biggest mistake jurisdictions make when they say they want to do reform, but they keep defaulting to detention, particularly for young people?
Can someone who heard that question repeat it? Just the last bit.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't fully grasp it either.
Anybody here?
Sorry, Senator
So
Cox.
what are the biggest mistakes that your countries have made? I think I heard someone say before that you've made the mistakes already that we can learn from. But when countries or governments say they want to do reform and they keep using detention as a default position, what are the things or lessons that our government can take from your experience to, I suppose, change that narrative or to absolutely put it on the right trajectory in order to have change?
So I think in the States, when the conversation evolved from a very philosophical screaming match to a get under the sink with a wrench conversation, I think things improved. So the philanthropic community and the federal government started to fund the kind of analysis I talked about. They basically said, we'll help you out if you get together your key stakeholders, do data analysis of your population, and engage in best practices. And when they said that, jurisdictions wanted to do it because they wanted to be the cool kids. Everybody wanted a Justice Department grant or a MacArthur Foundation grant or a Casey Foundation grant to be a model site. So now you have everybody in a room looking at best practices, looking about data that works with the kids, and then we're not screaming at each other anymore. We're not talking about the hyperbolic kid. Yes, of course, there are some kids that have done things that are bad enough so that they're going to need to be in some form of custody. But that was driving the whole conversation. And when we really were able to get beyond that and look at practices that were going to work for the vast majority of kids that come in and out of the system, we realized we just didn't need to use locked custody as much as we were. We were overusing it for the wrong kids because instead of looking at the data, we were looking at the headlines. So that really did help a lot. And the federal government absolutely had a role in that. They brought us together. They made us feel like we were doing best practices. We were engaged in very sensible, common sense, data-driven best practices reforms, not some philosophical debate.
Yeah, I would say in Scotland, unusually for the Scots, we started to focus more on the assets and the deficits, what was working. And when we started to talk about success stories, and we had many of them, and we had evidence about what was working, we were able to then build on them. And even where we had disagreement, I think people would agree on the evidence that we had. And I think that built consensus. And I think it was absolutely critical that our politicians, regardless of their political persuasion, could agree on what was best for children. It's much more difficult when you're talking about adults, but with children, I think we were able to get more consensus, and that has grown and built. We have had something slightly different. We've had the same government in place for the last 18 years. We also had very long-term We had long-term plans, 10-year plans, which I think is necessary because it's very difficult to achieve this sort of change in a 3 to 4 year political cycle. This is about long-term planning and being able to shut your eyes and think, for us, this is what Scotland should look like, and then go forward relentlessly towards that.
And for Spain, I would say that our experience came from, at the beginning, everybody was hiding in the legislation. Legislation was a reason for not doing things. We need to change legislation. We need to change legislation. The reality is not needed. The reality is policies what need to be changed, and that is the reason we started as a pilot. And the real change happened 10 years later when we were changing policies. We had time to prove, because at the beginning we didn't have the evidence in 1981, but we didn't change pretty much. The only legislation that was changed is allowing non-for-profit to run these type of centers, because before was just the public sector. When they allowed this to happen, after that, after 9 years and something, they changed all the legislation. But we needed to know what to change. Changing criminal age is not going to change what's happening anywhere. Yes, shouldn't be any kid under 14, well, I would say 16, but, in any type of detention. However, it's something that I cannot work with while I'm doing a pilot. No, my policy in my center maybe it's not going to have any 10 years, so that's all. But yes, it's to don't hide in why not to do this, is how we can do this, is what I will say.
Yeah, thank you.
For us,
I can't see you obviously, so I don't know if there's any other contributions that anybody wanted to make.
There is one more contribution to come, sorry.
Okay.
For us, it was defining child. What is a child? So child for us is also looking at the age. Even though statutory it is 12 for criminalization, but for us is looking at age. We are now looking at it up until the age of 26 for the state of Hawaii. So defining that was able to look at what are our responsibility to the youth, to the young child, so that we would be able to provide them the best service so they can flourish. So that really did help us to set the standard and set the mark based on any type of need that has been identified in all different agencies, so that we know how we are going to respond to any crisis in order for us to uplift this youth.
That's great. Thank you very much. If I can just do some follow-up questions on that. Just on the Scottish model, it does talk a lot about a whole of systems approach, and it's really built around early and effective intervention.
Yeah.
And what are the practical ingredients that make agencies actually work together early enough to stop children entering into the justice system in the first place? Because what this committee has heard on numerous occasions is by the time they're in the system, that constant coming back to the system is quite regular, and also graduating into adult incarceration. So, what from your experience, what are sort of the practical things that government or others need to do to make sure that agencies actually work together and make sure they do it early enough to stop children coming into the justice system? What does that look like?
So that's quite a complicated question and quite a long question. I think first off, it was education. We had some really experienced, so we've got the Centre for Youth Justice, which did a huge amount of education with a whole group of people like teachers and social workers, and so that we all had the same platform. We all had the same foundation of understanding and what our responsibility was. As I mentioned, the getting it right for every child was absolutely critical for all of us, that we had a single framework that we all worked to. So I think, that has been one of the things that I would say was probably the most important part. Of course, the challenge is that people move on. You have to keep on training people again and again and again, and that is quite wearing. It's quite expensive, but you know, teachers move on, social workers move on. So trying to keep that as muscle memory and part of the way that we look at the needs of the child has been quite challenging. Sorry, I didn't get all of the question.
What are the sort of ingredients that enable those agencies to work collaboratively together and to do it early enough to stop children coming into contact with the justice system?
Yeah, so that's probably the main one. We have 32 local authorities. It is a complex landscape. I would say that some people do it better than others. That's the honest assessment. Obviously we have some inspectorate agencies that check that people are doing things the right way, and you must. But it's probably, I can follow up with some sort of written answers to sort of, answer that more fully.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you very much. Ms. Olava, your model in Hawaii often is described as transforming youth correctional facility into a place of healing. What were the most important practical changes that turned that idea into sort of day-to-day practice for young people and for staff?
It was, again, it is community engagement. I cannot stress it enough. Because the elders are the one that came in and engaged. Of course, we go back to the youth voice. They know what they were going through. They know what their story is, and it is their story to tell. It is how we even engage them in how, we solicit them, because in order for them to be motivated and to change and for them to start that healing, it needs to come from them. So part of that, it is always about the youth voice, where they're at, the approach that we need to take the first step with. So the healing starts with them being able to engage us, and then and what approach we're going to use. Whether it's going to be through the cultural means of things, or is it going to be working with a therapist or someone who's already been trained that they have been working through across systems. But part of that healing is also identifying if they're ready to engage through the cultural aspects of things. So, again, it is based on the youth and what they identify what their needs are.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. They're all the questions from me.
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge.
Thanks so much, Chair. So the four of you have been here. How long have you been together here in Australia?
A week, really.
For a week?
A little bit more, yeah.
What have you been, for such different jurisdictions, what have you been talking about? And what are the kind of common threads you've been finding? Because it's pretty extraordinary having the four of you come together for a week.
Do you know, I think we've talked about exactly the same things. We come from we're a country of 5 million people. But actually the things that I've been talking about are exactly the same that Matt has been talking about and David's been talking about. Children's needs are predominantly the same. And actually, I think what we've also said, even when I was listening to Australian colleagues, the answers is the implementation that's a challenge. And that implementation gap is fundamentally about leadership, and that is political leadership, because we need our politicians to almost create the enabling environment for these things to happen.
Give you permission.
To give us permission and to also let people make mistakes. I think we live in a really risk-averse, environment just now where, talking about jailing people, etc., almost feels like the easiest thing to do. And yet actually what we've all tried to talk about is things that have been complicated, have been longer term, that have been based on relationships, but have fundamentally, for us, changed a country. And that's no bad thing. I don't think we've diverted at all, really, have we?
No.
Does anyone else want to, Madalena?
It's pretty much the same thing that Karen pretty much agreed to that. Because for us in our transformation, it was the leadership of the politician that changed it. They legislative us, the different agencies. And with that, help us now to form that foundation of the training is across systems, not just one, and it's a continuum over and over and over again.
And for me, all this week is to understand that we all were in a very bad situation in our countries, all of us. We all have politicians have the courage, the patience. You need to know that things are going to go wrong, 100%. Then it's like knowing that but overcoming that. And in a long term, this is not going to change in 2 years. This is going to be a long process. But it will get there. I mean, that is, I have no doubt that it will get there like anybody. I mean, we have so many different countries. And we've done it in so many different ways. But at the end, relationship, family, community, everything is the same.
Vincent?
Yeah, I want to agree with my colleagues. I think all the smarts, all the decency, all the hard work exists in Australia. We're no better in any of these other places than you guys are here. The implementation, as you said, that's one thought. The other thought is how hard JRI works you when you come over to visit.
No. And if I can just interject, in terms of, so you've talked about politicians taking that leadership role and I guess facilitating the change through legislation. Can I ask what role volunteer, community-based organisations, philanthropists also played? Was there a partnership in each of your jurisdictions?
I'm a not-for-profit.
Yes. No, and I'm just, this is...
when the legislation was going to change, it was politicians leading it.
Yeah, but it's...
Politicians, they don't know to do everything.
So community implemented?
We implemented the first ones.
Yes, okay.
But it's having everybody involved. It was community, we have us, judges, everybody in the same page. Psychologists telling you what is the brain development our legislation is very into the development of the kids. And that is key for everything.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say, having experienced people coming from all over Australia, I would have cut off my right arm to have had that level of community involvement, because we didn't have that. I waited for ages for people to walk through a front door. We've almost had to create that.
Okay.
You've already got people knocking down your doors to enable that to happen. I think it's critical. You have to bring the public with you. You do. It's because as you say, bad things will happen. It's also about, for me, we had to be clever in gathering some of the evidence about prevention, because that absence of evidence is no evidence of absence. Collecting things like well-being statistics so that we could give politicians comfort that we were going in the right direction. We could give the community and society the evidence base that what we were doing in terms of early intervention was having an effect on them, that they could feel safer, that the children were safer, that they had better outcomes. That took us a bit of a long time, to really to get that side of it. And I think that's what I would recommend to you, is to also focus on the evidence that we need to gather now, that preventative approach.
We have this strange thing in our politics, and I don't know if it's represented across your jurisdictions, but kids until they're 10 are precious and should be, cared for with every possible opportunity. And then they suddenly become 11 or 12 or 13, and then they become like violent social problems almost. And there's this kind of bizarre transition if you hear discussion about kids. I don't know if it's exactly at 10, I don't know if it's exactly at 11, but there's this kind of weird transition that happens in our discussion. Desperately keen to do everything you can to protect an 8-year-old, but suddenly quite comfortable whacking a 12-year-old in jail. Is this a peculiarly Australian thing, or?
I mean, I guess I do want to say, I think that there's, like, you asked a question about the philanthropic community and the nonprofit community. The philanthropic community in the States did some pretty in-depth polling and focus grouping on attitudes of the general public about youth crime to get at exactly that issue. And they concluded that really elected officials very often over-perceive the punitiveness of the community, that the community is much more open to the kinds of things we're talking about than one would believe. But between the sort of limited information you get, right? Because you'll get it from the media, or you'll get it from angry town hall meetings in which, the angriest person is the one, or who's going to choose to email you or text you. So that was one conclusion. The other conclusion I thought was fascinating is people want to hear solutions. They don't like racism in their juvenile justice system, right? They don't like that. They don't like inhumane treatment, but they also need to hear that they're going to be kept safe. And that they actually poll tested messages. And when you say the system is racist, more people were willing to support a harsh system when you stop at that. Because they fear, I think, what they hear when you say that is, you're just going to let black kids out because you feel bad for black kids, right? When you say the system is incarcerating children in a wildly racially disparate manner, and there are better ways that you can get at public safety than using incarceration in this disparate manner, you pick up lots of points. You have to add the solution, you have to attach it to your human rights and your civil rights arguments, or people feel like you are willing to endanger them to garner equity. And I think that was hugely important for our elected officials. And I mean, we just had an argument in Maryland this year, and before the the head of the Judiciary Committee did his opening remarks about a reform bill he wanted to do, he got briefed by the Vera Institute of Justice on their messaging that they got funded by a foundation to create. And I'm telling you, his opening speech was straight out of that stuff. He was talking solutions. He didn't not mention racial disparities. You can't. He's a black man in the state of Maryland. 90% of the kids in my system were black kids. He couldn't not mention it. But he just went on to assure people that really what this is about is public safety as well as equity and human rights. And I think those were two important things.
Is that part of what you were discussing, Karen, where you say you lead with the good? You sort of lead with the good?
Yeah, I think you have to. I mean, it's behaviour change. If we talk about behaviour change, and it's, I train as a psychologist, so Prosecco and Di Clementi, how you're motivated to change. To change, even personally or even as a society, you have to put the best version of yourself on the fridge. That's what I want to be like. And we had to do that, and particularly in Scotland, where Calvin runs through our veins, where we are slightly depressive and would love to focus on the negative. You have to be relentlessly positive, to talk about what success looks like, to say, and to also take accountability. I've had to take accountability as a leader, to say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be accountable. If I get it wrong, you can hold me to account. And I think people need to hear that as well. And, and also to talk about failures. I'm quite comfortable talking about failure because I have failed at things and I've tried to learn quickly and go on. And I think the public quite like that too. I think they want to hear that you've tried things that, and to have that sort of humble government.
But is leading good also, does it work with, is it the same kind of approach that you took in Spain or Hawaii? I don't want to turn this into a Catholic / Baptist / Calvinist kind of thing, but is that the same kind of lead with the good?
Okay. Yeah. And did you start with that what you were doing was failing? Is that how it's, because if you're measuring along the way to say, we're not necessarily going to be perfect, we're sort of going to be on this journey where it will be a bit like this.
So there's a great book that talks about prevention, how countries change.
Yeah.
And what it says is you have this thing called multiple streams analysis, and it's the only way that, and what it says first is, for change, you need firstly a compelling narrative.
Yeah.
Now we've all got that, a compelling narrative. Then you need a zeitgeist in politicians. So sometimes that's about the beginning of a new parliament, but you also need a plan, and those three things need to happen at the same time.
Yeah.
And it must happen at the same time, and it is the only evidence base of change in countries, and it's a well-known policy. sort of strategy. And for us, that was, you know, we did have the compelling, we were, you know, we had really difficult times, and everybody's talked that, including Vincent.
In fact, and we were coming here, and we still having to fight every single day to keep this. This is a very fragile system. You have 2, 3, 4 bad incidents, and of course the public opinion is going to come. We need to holding everybody to account and move things forward. And every day we need to improve our system. We are not just there, Kevin. We are fine, done. This never finishes. I mean, never. And we need to argue with some people all the time. New politicians coming, new civil servants coming. That is our role, I guess, forever.
I think you were saying that too, Madalena. Even the cohort of young people you're dealing with, what's bringing them into contact with authorities changes, and sort of being aware of that?
Yes, and that's exactly what it is, right? When we know it is the youth that tells the narrative that we're now going to be able to present it.
I could be wrong, but what Hawaii's doing with the feedback from young people being direct in the system, sort of even feeding back into legislation, that does seem to be something kind of distinctly positive that I'm hearing from Hawaii, but maybe I just wasn't listening hard enough earlier. And if that is, I wouldn't mind hearing a little more about it, Madeline.
I think it's across. It is just that we have different ways of looking at it for youth commissions. Having youth commissions for us is looking at, there's so many youth, you know, like they said, youth justice is like this is the last straw. First, it was with school education, with the Department of Health, CAMHD with services, or CWS, and justice was just that last, you know, cover up, and now it puts everything in this pedestal. Getting all the voices from those youth and empowering them to, our whole motto is about empowering youth to be leaders of tomorrow, because empowering them to be leaders is going to change what the community brings forward. And they don't do it by themselves. We're there to guide. How do you facilitate such things? And hearing those voices, and they go out, because when we walk into any agency or any services or any of the youth, they're not going to talk to us. We're system people. So they're going to talk. Their guards come down when there is a peer support, like they understand, I know the story, this is where I went. But we empower the youth to look at it from a perspective that this is what we aspire to be, and that is and we continue to remind them of that, right? Not to look at where we can acknowledge where we came from, but how do we continue to do the work? So your experience is not going to be the experience of another youth that is in the system.
We didn't start like that. We didn't know how to put the ducks in the same row. Imagine asking kids. We didn't know anything. We didn't have evidence. Now, even the kids are in the panel of recruitment. They are recruiting the member staff with us. They know better than anybody how to read adults. They are in front of government. They are in parliament. They are speaking. We have given them the kids, now that we have improved, more a voice. Before, at the beginning, I would say that was not us. We had the kid as, okay, then what is the kid need? We need to fulfill. Now we speak about emotions, even the adult. Everything is more, before was like here, and now it's more, we are in the same level. I have different responsibilities, and that's it. But yeah.
I mean, I would say the work of the Promise, which is about reducing the number of care experienced young people who often have some terrible outcomes, I think is probably the best blueprint I've ever seen. They spoke to 5,000 children. The children co-produced what the outcomes, the change in legislation they wanted. They were on groups with the First Minister, with politicians, and I've never been. I mean, it was incredibly affecting. But they were the best diagnosticians of the system. You know, when we asked them, what was it you needed? You know, and the work of the Promise, I think, has revolutionised, you know, care and the care system and what we do to children to how do we do it with you? And how do we keep you in the family where it's safe to do so and prevent some of the really awful outcomes for some of our children and most disadvantaged children?
I don't want to embarrass anyone in the room, but like were the kids saying, actually, we just needed help before it got to this? Is that kind of what they were saying?
Indeed.
Yeah.
In the U.S., the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act was the one that was signed by President Ford that was recently reconstituted under President Trump in 2018. And that has 4 core requirements. Keep kids out of adult facilities, keep them separate. If they are in adult facilities, keep them separate from adults. Stop locking up status offenders and address racial disparities. And so the federal government block grants money to states, and each one of those things they fail to do, they would lose 25% of the block grant. So if they didn't do any of those things, they would lose 100% of the block grant money. And it requires that every state have a state advisory group and that there be young people represented on the state advisory group. So that all came down from the feds.
Would it be too much? I know that they've been driving you hard, but could you provide some more detail about that?
Yeah, sure.
How the block, particularly the federal block funding worked, and the kind of ratchet up, ratchet down if they meet guidelines?
Absolutely. And so that's one of the things the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention administers that at the federal level, but then they also provide research. So I talked about risk assessment instruments. It's challenging for the Northern Territory to develop their own risk assessments. It costs a lot of money. It requires expertise they may not have. So for us, you know, we can get those things from the Office of Juvenile Justice. We can get technical assistance if we want to learn more how to use those things, how to develop a multi-systemic therapy program. There's all these best practices that they're constantly trying to feed us that, you know, as juvenile correctional administrators, we paid attention to that stuff. They would bring us together. We'd have conferences. They'd create affinity groups. You sort of grow the practice that way.
I guess as we're sort of coming to the end of time, which I'm sure you guys are all very excited to get to a Friday night. And I hope you get to relax this evening in Sydney. No, I was going to say, where are they? Where are they? Hopefully for a lovely dinner.
We could try and subpoena them.
We're very grateful for the evidence you've given. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us that you think we haven't asked the right questions or we haven't gone to a place that you think it would be very valuable information for us to know?
I just wanted to give you hope. Things can change. We've been there and things can go much better. But we need you to do all of this. I mean, what can be done? We are not the thing we've said. We are not the most intelligent people in the whole world. The only thing is we keep going and we are stubborn, I'm pretty sure. And but things can change.
I'll just check that. Senator Cox, did you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, I don't, but just extending my thanks as well for joining us today for the hearing.
Excellent. If I can just express our sincere thanks for your time. We know you've had a very busy schedule. This is incredibly valuable for us. We extended out this inquiry especially so that we could hear evidence from you in person. And I think this has been incredibly valuable for the committee. If it isn't too much of an indulgence to ask, as we formulate the report and the recommendations, I would love to be able to stay in touch with each of you just to get your feedback and your thoughts on some of where the thinking will lead us. But thank you. It does give me hope that there can be something better here for the young people of Australia. And I think what's happening now is not serving them well. I don't think it's serving the communities well. And I think it is great to hear that there is a different path that can be forged. So thank you very much. We are very grateful. I know Senator Shoebridge has offered some homework. If you are able to provide that back to the Secretariat, we would be most grateful. Again, thank you for giving evidence today. Thank you also to Broadcasting that have set up here, Hansard and the Secretariat for setting up a committee hearing outside of Parliament House in Canberra. Very grateful, and with that...
delightful room, can I add, which in a very Sydney touch is surrounded by a property developer site. So, but it is lovely in the Mitchell Library. Yeah, yeah.
I now declare this hearing adjourned.